Everyone, I'm Jennifer Whitaker, trauma specialist, empowerment strategist, and shadow guide. And I'm here today to talk about several different topics. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey, but this journey is all about emotions. I'm not going to start out talking about emotions, but it really is. It's all about understanding our emotions in a different way. But in order to understand our emotions in a different way, I'm going to start talking about a couple different biases that we have. And the first thing that I want to mention is the illusory truth effect. And the illusory truth effect is the tendency to believe false, skewed, or inaccurate information to be correct after repeated exposure to that information. A very basic law of propaganda, influence, and coercion is to repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. So this illusory truth effect works because the human brain has a familiarity bias. So when faced with a choice, a person will pick the one that's most familiar to them, even when the odds of benefiting from that choice are drastically lower. And that's because our brains and nervous systems are wired to be alert and cautious about anything that's unfamiliar. Familiarity bias is our tendency to overvalue things that we already know. So when we take in false information repeatedly, we're more likely to start believing that false information simply because it has become familiar to us, not because it's true. So some false information I want to talk about today that revolves around emotions is this concept of positive and negative emotions. There's no such thing as positive and negative emotions, period. However, the repeated use of these terms over and over in the last several years, and I think we're even going on a couple decades of just being bombarded with this language, it has built up and implanted a familiarity bias of false information that has led to the widespread belief that some emotions are good while other emotions are bad. And this false belief is having a detrimental impact on the emotional well-being of many people individually and collectively as a society here in the United States. And it's happening in other countries, but because I'm in the States, I'm going to focus on this country. So let's talk about specific emotions. And I'm going to go through several specific emotions today because this is important. And it's worth giving the so-called negative emotions another look, because when you give them another look, you realize they're not so negative after all. So let's start out with anger. Healthy anger, and there is such a thing, is a motivator. Anger gives us agency. And the Merriam-Webster definition of anger is the capacity, condition, or state of acting or of exerting power. So anger helps us move toward positive change in our lives by alerting us to move away from dangerous and destructive individuals, places, organizations, or systems of belief. So anger is protective. By actively bypassing and avoiding anger, we implicitly forfeit our ability to act on our own behalf, thus leaving ourselves susceptible to the control and coercion of others. Shame. There is such a thing as healthy shame. Healthy shame holds us accountable. Shame protects social relationships by preventing us from causing damage and motivating us to repair the damage when it does happen. Shame lets us know when we're living out of integrity, which means there's an incongruence between our personal values and the words and actions that we're outwardly showing those around us. And by actively bypassing and avoiding shame, we run the risk of becoming desensitized to the harm that we cause others, intentionally or unintentionally. And we might also risk living a life out of alignment with our own value system, which, by the way, Just FYI, our value systems might differ quite drastically from the value systems of those closest to us, and that includes our siblings, our parents, our spouses. Shift onto anxiety. Healthy anxiety lets us know what is too important to ignore. It draws our attention wherever it's needed the most, and anxiety gives us a sense of what we truly care about and what makes us keenly aware of what's precious enough to warrant concern around its potential absence from our lives. Anxiety can direct our actions, so we're acting on behalf of things that matter to us, even if it's difficult to do so. By actively bypassing anxiety, we run the risk of losing our ability to sleep, to eat, to attend social functions, and we may even experience chronic physical symptoms due to unmitigated anxiety. Sadness and depression. Healthy sadness and depression are natural responses to loss. Depression asks us to press the pause button on the over expenditure of our energy to the demands of daily life. The purpose of depression is to give us time and space to satisfactorily process grief, guilt, and mourning, because when we do, we experience growth as a result. By actively bypassing our sadness and depression, we risk getting stuck in feelings of emptiness, hopelessness, worthlessness, and even irritability for months or even years on end. We have decreased energy and often experience fluctuations in appetite, weight, and our ability to sleep. And there may be physical symptoms like increased headaches or migraines, and we might even experience thoughts of suicide. Doubt. Healthy doubt can build our critical thinking skills. Doubt and skepticism can prompt us to critically examine, reflect upon something in order to discern what's true from what's false. Healthy doubt can also help keep us in integrity, and it can protect us from being tricked or taken advantage of because we're more likely to initiate and engage in further inquiry, thus yielding more information for the purposes of making wise decisions. By actively bypassing doubt, we risk procrastinating, paralyzing our ability to make decisions, creating low self-esteem and self-worth, and experiencing emotional instability and a chronic lack of motivation in our lives. Grief. Healthy grief requires us to acknowledge the pain of loss, and not just death, but loss of any kind. Healthy grief allows us to metabolize the energy that's bound to the person, place, or experience that we've lost. Grief has a unique way of creating connection through support, which can give us a sense of purpose and personal worth in the world around us. Healthy grief ultimately increases our experience of other complex emotions, such as compassion, kindness, gratitude, confidence, understanding, and empathy. By actively bypassing grief, we risk becoming numb, detached, bitter, and chronically lacking trust in others. Unprocessed grief can lead to intrusive thoughts, rumination, and a persistent longing for what was lost, a persistent longing for what was lost. It can lead to a loss of purpose or a chronic feeling that life just isn't worth living. So those are some of the effects that we can experience by bypassing, suppressing, and ignoring our so-called negative emotions. And these are some of the effects that we're seeing in the world around us and in ourselves because we're pushing away these emotions instead of metabolizing them. So let's go on and take another look at the so-called positive list of emotions. Joy and happiness. Joy and happiness are often used interchangeably, but they're not. So first, let's discuss the differences. Happiness is an outward expression that's based on external factors. Happiness has a certain look to it, and it's associated with our five senses, which makes happiness a temporary and fleeting experience. Happiness doesn't stay too long because our senses don't experience anything for more than a few minutes at a time. Joy, on the other hand, is a deep, enduring inner feeling that persists, and joy is associated with a deep sense of contentment. There is no specific look to joy, and it's constant and abiding. They both sound great. However, too much of anything can become toxic. Too much happiness can actually make us unhappy in the long run. It can lead to increased levels of gullibility, selfishness, and it can make us less successful in life. Yikes, right? That's because being too happy can cause us to pay less attention to details. It can be a predictor of risk-taking behaviors, and it can lead to less creativity flowing through us. Too much joy can lead to overstimulation, which can in turn lead to greater levels of agitation and anxiety. And overfocus on the joy we experience can lead to numbing, disengagement, or dissociation from all the other emotions that are meant to motivate us into action in other areas of our lives. It can lead us to ignore or miss altogether a threat response, leaving us susceptible to manipulators, gaslighters, narcissists, and other predatory personality styles in the world. Excitement. Excitement is a physiological response in the body that's characterized by an elevated heart rate, butterflies in the stomach, sometimes sweating, and a sense of readying ourselves for action. And guess what? This is the exact same physiological response as anxiety. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is the underlying emotion that's associated with that physiological response. So with anxiety, there's an element of fear. With excitement, there's an element of joy and anticipation. And it sounds logical to turn joy into excitement and just flip the script. And that takes a little bit of mental gymnastics. And I even used to encourage people to do this practice. Silly me. And thank goodness that I now know better, because an overfocus on excitement can cause us to interrupt and take over conversations. We can rush through things too quickly, missing important details. We can become grandiose about our talents, our creativity, and our abilities. Too much excitement could cause us to overreact, and it can lead to a sense of arrogance and blind optimism. And it can also lead to being too physical with the people around us. Hope. Hope suggests a feeling of confidence or assurance in the possibility that what one expects, desires, or longs for will actually happen. Under certain circumstances, hope can be a lifeline and a lifesaver. However, too much hope can be detrimental because it can set the stage for defeat and disappointment. It can thwart us from adequately preparing from an inevitable outcome that we just don't want. And when hope is treated like a prayer, hope can hinder us from actively pursuing and working to achieve something that we really want. Hope can lead to self-deception, a relinquishment of personal power, and ultimately a state of hopelessness. Inspiration. Inspiration is the feeling of being stimulated to do or feel something, especially a sudden, brilliant, creative, or timely idea. Inspiring memes and quotes float around social media and they make us feel better, but too much information can backfire by dampening our productivity and damaging our workflow. So think about this. Think about all this information that I've just given you for just a moment, because so many of our emotions, every single one that I've listed today, has been labeled as either positive, which is good, or negative, which is bad. And if we're going to use such language and we're going to say things that are good or bad, we need to apply the appropriate definitions to these words. So in terms of emotions, it's flawed and erroneous thinking to equate positive with good and negative with bad. But because of the illusory truth effect and the familiarity bias, that's exactly what we've done to ourselves. So I would like to give you an analogy before I wrap up today and give you an entirely different paradigm through which to look at your emotions. I want you to think of the positive and the negative in relation to emotions as if they're terminals on your car battery. Terminals on your car battery are neither good nor bad. There's a charge, but that charge doesn't mean anything. And thinking that emotions are good or bad is flat out the wrong way to think about it, just like it's the wrong way to think about battery terminals. So battery terminals have positive and negative charges because, quite simply, that's how batteries work. Electrons flow out of the negatively charged terminal and into the positively charged one, creating an electric current. And current is associated with electron flow, not electron accumulation. So inside the battery, a chemical reaction is pushing the electrons from the positive terminal to the negative terminal. So whenever you get this inside in the chemical reaction pushing from the positive terminal to the negative, and then it coming out the negative and going into the positive, that's what's called a circuit. So what would happen if your mechanic just decided one day that the negative terminal is bad and the positive terminal was good, and you're taking your car in for him to work on your batteries? And what if he switched them? What if he put both clamps on the positive terminal and left the negative one alone? What do you think would happen to your vehicle? Well, the extreme heat produced would cause the acid inside your battery to boil, warping the battery, melting the plastic that are over the little cable connections, and potentially spilling acid and damaging other parts nearby. If it's a jumper cable that's hooked up wrong, it can cause mechanical damage to the vehicle that's giving you a jump. The power surge could cause irreparable damage to the alternator in your engine. And there's a chance that the battery could actually explode, and that can cause all kinds of harm because the battery acid will damage everything in the vicinity that it lands on. And if there are people in the vicinity, you might get blasted with this hot acid. And you're also certain to find some blown up fuses and wires in the mix too. So if you really think about this analogy and the damage that you can do to your vehicle and the engine and what actually operates it and makes it run and move forward, you would never label the battery terminals as good or bad, because positive and negative is just the charge of electrons, and that's simple physics. It's the same thing with our emotions. Our emotions are neither good nor bad. So what I'm hoping you'll take away today is a greater awareness of the biases that are just naturally built into us, because when we become aware of these biases, and these biases are nobody's fault. It's just how humans are built. So when we become aware of natural human biases and natural human tendencies, and then we can see what's happening, we can see that we've had this flow, like a fire hose flow of information for a couple decades, trying to convince us that some emotions are good and some are bad. And frankly, that's just BS. I couldn't think of any more BS today than that. And whenever you think about the damage that can do to us, maybe it's time to stop, pause, and change our thoughts and change our approach to how we deal with our emotions. I'm Jennifer. I hope you've got some good information, and I hope you find this valuable. Please reach out if you have any questions. And if you found this valuable, subscribe, hit the bell below so you get alerted whenever there's a new video that comes out on YouTube. I will see you all next time. Have a great day, everyone.